Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa.
Welcome into another episode of the Heat Check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball, basketball, college. I'm your host, Brian Rauf, joined as always by my co-hosts, Connor Hope and Riley Davis. Wrapping up our season preview series, today we are talking about the non-power conferences across the country. We're going to talk about the four, I'll say other high major leagues that are out there: American, A10, Mountain West, WCC. Touch on what we like from the rest of the country as well, getting you ready for what you need to know from those conferences. Season starts on Monday, guys. I can't wait. The big news, though, we have to get to first, and I'm going to lean on Connor here as our WCC and Gonzaga expert, is that Gonzaga in the Big 12 had some meetings this week about Gonzaga potentially joining the Big 12. There have been some rumors about Gonzaga joining the Big East, and we don't know what this means for that, or if maybe this brings the Big East back to the table. It seemed to be if Gonzaga was going to join a power conference, that would be the fit, considering that Gonzaga does not have football. But if the Big 12 says football doesn't matter, I think that's interesting. And certainly, Connor, it's interesting that they came to the table and there's an actual meeting and conversations going on here about Gonzaga joining.
Yeah, and sorry for my voice. It's going.
It's what happens when you're a new father. Yeah, he's just it happens.
I was told that this was driven by Fox in there. They signed the new deal, them and ESPN, with the Big 12, but Fox gets first grabs at the games they want. They told both the Big East and the Big 12, who have both had exploratory conversations with Gonzaga, to add Gonzaga. That would give Fox 5 of the top 10 programs in the country on their docket. It would give the Big 12 4 of the top 10 programs in the country at the top of their conference. So, it's a net positive for both. Obviously, adding a program like Gonzaga for basketball specifically, in both men's and women's, just serves to help your conference, the level of play in your conference, increase. It could help increase the number of bids that your conference gets. But for Gonzaga, it gives them more TV revenue. Mm-hmm. It won't hurt them at all from a recruiting. It might even help them from a recruiting standpoint, because they can get some of these players that might not go there because they want to play against the big boys in the Big 12 mm-hmm. or the Big 10 or the ACC. And look, it kind of flips their schedule, right? It goes from a really tough early schedule to now you have one of the toughest conference schedules in the country as a Gonzaga, right? And so, I think it's a good thing whether they go to the Big East or the Big 12. I think the worst thing that they could do is choose geography and go to the Pac-12, which is also rumored to be bidding for Gonzaga. I think the loss of UCLA and USC severely limits the ceiling that a Pac-12 team has in terms of, the jump from the WCC to the Pac-12. But at the end of the day, it would help the Big 12. It would help Gonzaga. The biggest winner might be St. Mary's, because now they are the big dog mm-hmm. in their conference. And the biggest loser, if they were to join the Big 12, would be BYU, who is no longer able to duck the Zags. So I like that the conversations are happening. We're likely not going to see it until at least 2025 or later. Mm-hmm. But if anyone says that Gonzaga wouldn't be a top 10 to 15 program in the country because they're joining a high major conference, I mean, that's just not true. I think
but
all
the
the
narrative on the chopping block.
All the disadvantages of being in the WCC would be off the table, and I think they would have all the resources and all the capabilities, short of, big name NIL boosters at their disposal to help sign these top kids out of high school.
Connor, is there any team, like aside from St. Mary's, that you see, assuming this Gonzaga move eventually happens, would kind of be that clear-cut number 2? Because it seemed like, again, those top 2 with Gonzaga and BYU are out of there. St. Mary's has been in that number 3 spot, sometimes number 2 spot, really over the last half decade, maybe even longer. Is there a clear-cut number 2 to you? Maybe the Portland Pilots, a little rejuvenated under Coach Leggins.
I don't know if there's a clear-cut number 2. Portland, if Shante stays there, is really good, but I believe, Brian, you had him on the jump seat in the ALMANAC,
Yep.
and his ability to coach at Portland could ultimately, cause him to jump into a better job, because Portland's just not a great job, if we're being honest, and so that limits my projections for them. Santa Clara, I think, is going to be up there for the most part, just because Herb Sendek has shown that he can be consistent, if nothing else, at Santa Clara. But then San Francisco. I mean, San Francisco's kind of become the poor man's Murray State, where, like, you just expect good things no matter who the coach is. Like, they're on their third coach now. I think that Gurlison is going to be really good at San Francisco. Part of it's the location. Part of it's the facilities, but I mean, part of it's just they keep hiring internally, so they continue to have that coaching mantra. The culture, everything continues to stay the same, which I think is good for San Francisco. So, if I were to pick one of those programs to emerge as like a clear-cut number 2, it'd probably be San Francisco. But if Leggins stays at Portland for a significant amount of time, and by significant I mean like 3 or 4 more years, like, you could see Portland emerge as that team.
Yeah. Also, I might have accidentally called them the Pirates instead of the Pilots, and I just want to get ahead of that. I don't know if I misspoke.
I heard pilots. I heard pilots.
Okay, let's roll with that. I was just thinking, I've endeared myself to a large part of the Gonzaga fan base, but I don't want to be the bad guy to other WCC schools and then getting accused of East Coast bias.
Well, and the thing is that they're ship pilots. Like, their mascot is a captain.
Oh, right.
It's not an airline pilot, so you're on the right track when you say pilot.
It's gonna be a pirate pilot, right? Pirate pilot. One thing working against, I think maybe now WCC teams like that too, and we've already seen it a little bit. The Pac-12 projects to have a good deal of openings coming up in the next couple of years. You look at Oregon State, potentially Washington, potentially Arizona State, potentially Cal. Schools that would likely poach a WCC coach, a really good, up-and-comer, somebody like a Shante Leggins. That's why one of the reasons I had him in the jump seat is that he's arguably the top young guy now on the West Coast with Todd Golden gone, right? Like, those programs are going to come calling, and Herb Sendek is probably cemented at Santa Clara at this point, but San Francisco, Portland, those programs have coaches that are desirable. And may end up continuing to be desirable, projected to be that way at the very least. So that could cause some people there behind St. Mary's and Randy Bennett there. I don't know if they would turn into a one-bid league, but it would certainly, I think, be that way maybe a little bit more often than not. But for now, Gonzaga and BYU are still in this league, Riley. Gonzaga, I think, clear-cut number 1. It was a banner year for the conference really last year. This year, not so much. Can anybody, I don't want to say challenge Gonzaga, but look at that second tier as St. Mary's, BYU. Are either of them, for sure NCAA tournament caliber in your mind?
In my mind, I don't know if either are for sure NCAA tournament calibers, just based on the coaching with Mark Pope and Randy Bennett. I think both will at least be on the bubble. I might lean a little bit towards BYU slightly over St. Mary's right now, but it is interesting that throughout these first couple of years at BYU, Mark Pope has been known for his guard play. I mean, part of that has to do with having a stalwart like Alex Barcello, and last year bringing in Tijon Lucas, and in the past having Brandon Averett, and there's probably another good guard up there they had that I'm forgetting. I feel like there's a third guy I'm forgetting about, but and that they've been predicated on just having 2 or 3 guys who can get a bucket, who can create out of ball screens, who can shoot off the bounce. But I will say, they do seem more front court focused this year, but even when they've been more guard oriented, they've controlled the glass on both ends of the floor, and I think that should work very well in their favor again this year with Fousseyni Traore and Atiki Ali Atiki both coming back. And Gideon George is someone who, I don't know, I kind of thought he would break out last year, but to me, I think he seems more of just a really versatile defender who can guard multiple positions, shows off some pretty phenomenal athleticism sometimes, but doesn't really have much offensively. But yeah, BYU, I think they have several high upside front court pieces. It's just really going to come down to, is Rudy Williams going to be able to step in and be that guy in the wake of Alex Barcello? And kind of have a tough time seeing him be, quite as consistent as him, but maybe he's good enough. Combine that with the front court, maybe Jackson Robinson, a little down transfer from Arkansas, gives them some pop on the wing. But yeah, I would see them. I'd give them a slight edge over St. Mary's right now, just because even with their guard questions, I think it's. I don't know. St. Mary's to me, I think has a bigger guard question, just replacing Tommy Kuzi.
Connor, I know you're down on the rest of the league overall as well. Could this be a year where somebody else creeps into that top three and knocks either St. Mary's or BYU out?
I think St. Mary's is pretty cemented in the top three.
I would agree.
I agree that I think BYU's ceiling is higher, but St. Mary's, I mean, they might have the best defense in the conference, including Gonzaga that we're expecting or projecting to be better defensively. Like, they just have an elite defense. They have two really good scorers in shooters in Kyle Bowen and Alex Dukas. Logan Johnson is a really good defender as well. So I really like the St. Mary's team. I think if BYU makes the tournament, you could be, or you might be looking at a 3-bid WCC, because I think St. Mary's floor is kind of that first four bubble area. If I were to project one of them were to drop, it would probably be BYU for that reason. But the only team that I think you can really project to be in the conversation for that number 3 slot or number 2 slot is San Francisco, just based on the talent they have. Like, I'm really high on Portland to finish in the top half, but that's high for Portland, not necessarily high for the WCC.
Right.
But with USF, I mean, yes, you lose Bouye, but you bring in Tyrell Roberts, who's a 35% three-point shooter, pretty good guard, redshirt senior. You keep Khalil Shabazz, who was just as important in the little things as Bouye was, even if he wasn't that kind of score anywhere type of guard. Julian Rishwain, 43% three-point shooter. Tony Rochak, the transfer, I mean, he went off at the beginning of last year. Comes in from UC San Diego. I think he will fit in really nicely into that kind of Johan Misalski type role. And so you bring in the Washington State transfer in Roberts. You bring in Rochak. You bring in 2 other transfers from high major programs. Gigi Beria from Georgia State.
Gigi Beria is awful. I think I might knock San Francisco.
Right, but is he
at Georgia Tech?
Is he awful for the standards of he's your 5th guy in the WCC?
Right,
like,
that's fair. He just like barely stayed on. He got played off the court for like a 10-win Georgia Tech team last year.
Right, but he's 7'1", and I think he fits what San Francisco likes from their 5s. I mean, in the past, you've looked at their 5s, and their 5s have just been kind of big bodies. Like, that's what they ask you to be, and he's obviously a big body. And then Marcus Williams from Texas A&M, like, again, might not have been able to hang on or score at an efficient level in the SEC, but you put him in the WCC, I think he does well. Josh Kuhn and Zane Meeks, like, that is an 8-man rotation right there that I think could be enough to finish top 3, but I think it would require BYU doing what BYU has done the last couple of years, which is lose games they shouldn't. Which is possible, and given the questions that they have at the guard position, like, you might even say likely. But you also have to factor in that San Francisco has a new head coach.
Right.
And while Gurlison I like taking over the helm, I don't know if he's going to have that instant success to pull them into the top 3.
Where was with Tyrell Roberts? I feel like that's a kind of a transfer that's probably going under the radar some from this league. But bringing in a guy who scored 11.5 points in the Pac-12, albeit on like some poor efficiency, I think I doubt he's the same type of athlete that Jamari Bouye was. But I would guess just bank on the USF system that they're going to be able to get some type of production out of him. Where was he before Washington State? Is this his third school?
I do not know that off the top of my head.
Anybody know off the top of his head?
I think Connor's looking.
Well, forget I asked that.
No, he was somewhere else, and I forgot where it was. I think he was a D2 transfer. Okay. I think actually, you know what it was? I think he was UC San Diego before they were D1, and then he transferred to Washington State.
Because Wazoo had a couple of like transfer guards last year. They had the guy from South Alabama, and I Michael Flowers, I think, something Flowers. Yeah. I'd get those two confused. I was like, is this the same guy? But I realized it's a different one. But
yeah, no, I want to say he was UC San Diego, but didn't play in the Big West. So
one thing
speaking of,
go ahead, Riley.
I was just going to say, speaking of guards and just guards stepping into more high usage roles on some of these teams that could be in that top tier. With St. Mary's, I'd be curious, Connor, just with you having the most tabs on this league, do you think either Aiden Mahaney or Augustus Marsulionis, is there either of those that you're particularly high on who could step into that role vacated by Kuzi?
I don't know if I'm high on Mahaney. I think he ends up starting, which is not something that Randy Bennett has traditionally done. He's traditionally gone with more experienced guards, at least at the point guard position, and then used the first year kind of off the bench. You saw that with Jordan Ford. Jordan Ford came off the bench behind Emmett Nahr in his first year and then stepped into that starting role in the second. I don't know if I'm high on Mahaney, but I think that of all of the guards he's had in the past, Mahaney is probably the one that I'm highest on as an immediate impact in the St. Mary system. And part of that, I feel like, is his size at 6'3". He's larger than some of the other guards that they've brought in the past. But also, I think he's just more ready to play immediately, at least at a high-level, WCC level type of guy.
Real quick, but before we move on, I want to get your guys' thoughts on the big picture with Gonzaga. Because, Connor, we had been a Gonzaga podcast for the last couple years, and I think are still high on Gonzaga, and rightfully so. But the question with the Zags every year is, can they win the national championship this year? Is this the year they get over the hump? I don't think so. I don't think this Gonzaga team is nearly as good as the team from the past 2 years, and a lot of that comes down the guard play. Drew Timme is going to be awesome down low. But we're counting on Strother taking steps up. We're counting on Nolan Hickman taking steps up. Hunter Salas taking steps up. Malachi Smith really taking a step up too and becoming an impact player at a higher level. It's a lot of what ifs for this team, and even if all those what ifs hit, they still have some holes that could pop up. I am not sold on them being a title team. I think they are still a second weekend caliber team, and if things break right, some of those things happen. Could be a Final Four team, but to me, this is not a team that is going to be the one that ends the streak and wins Gonzaga's first title.
I think it comes down to what we see in those early to mid-December matchups. If the defense comes around, and that's a big if, but if it comes around, I think the defense could be better start to finishing games than it was last year. Because when Chet was off the floor, the players were playing the same as they were when Chet was on the floor, which is we can take chances because Chet's going to clean up the glass. And that's just not the case this year. As much as I like what I've seen from Efton Reed as a defender in the middle, he's not a Chet Holmgren.
Right.
So you have to get better defensively. No, it's not. But I think that falls on the guard play. Like, the guards are going to have to do more to prevent him from having to be a Chet Holmgren or try to be a Chet Holmgren when he's on the floor. The only two players that are keeping their roles from last year are Drew Timme and Rajier Bolton. And there's a question about whether Rajier Bolton's even keeping his own. Like, Rajier Bolton might just be the guy that closes out games trying to score the ball for Gonzaga, because he's looked like that so far, and he looked like that at points last year, where I think he might be the best scoring option outside of Drew Timme for this team. Behind him, it's a lot of question marks, and I feel like if you're going to discount the Zags, then you're going to have to discount a lot of other teams in the top 10. But there are only 3 teams that I feel better about winning a national championship right now than the Zags, and they're all very experienced teams. So, and that being Baylor, Houston, and North Carolina. Like, I would put those 3 ahead of the Zags in terms of winning a national championship. But, again, we won't know what the Zags are until late November, early to mid-December. And if at that point, like, if they get run off the court by Baylor, like, then we can be like, okay, maybe they're a top 5 to 10 team, but they're not consistent enough to win a national championship. But if they hang with Baylor or beat them, then I think we're singing a different tune. So is this the year? I'm not picking them to win the national championship, but they're probably on a list of about 6 to 7 schools that I think can win the national championship.
You brought up Houston. Make a smooth transition over to the American here. Riley, Houston was our number 1 team in the ALMANAC's top 25. Our heat check rankings have them number 2. Like, obviously, they're in that title contention mode. What's their ceiling?
Oh, it's easy, a national championship ceiling. I think it feels like their floor. I'm not a gambling man, but like their floor, if you don't pick Houston to the Sweet 16, you're missing out on just like a free space in your bracket pool. I would even say you could go as far to put them in the Elite 8, because that's just what they're going to do under Kelvin Sampson. They're going to be a top 4 seed or top 5 seed. I think they were a 5 seed this past year, but their style is impervious to off nights because they just play defense so well and grab so many rebounds. Even that game against Villanova where they were clanking everything, both teams were for a little bit. It's like they were grabbing those rebounds, and I mean, I think it's. I heard this, I think it was a Field of 68 podcast, or maybe it was a 3-Man Weed podcast, where they were talking about how Marcus Sasser could likely be the best guard in college basketball, and that yet he's not like appointment level television. Like, he's not like a Jalen Suggs type where you're telling your friends you got to tune into this guy who's going to be a top 5 pick and is a highlight reel waiting to happen. But at the same time, Sasser is like, his two-way prowess is freaking awesome. Like, it's not just that he can heat up and score off the bounce and everything, but he also is going to lock down his man on the other end. He's going to be annoying and take charges too. And I think that having that is, like, Jamal Shed was pretty fantastic in his stead last year when Sasser was hurt. But I mean, Sasser's just going to add a different dimension to this team. Plus, you have definitely a potential first round guy. I'd even say lottery guy in Jarris Walker, which Houston hasn't had, even in this run that they've been doing. And having that NBA-type talent, it matters.
Yeah, the NBA-type talent, too, is not going to be a redundant skill set to other guys on the roster, right? Like, that's a huge part. Quentin Grimes on an NBA roster. Mari Brooks spent some time on an NBA roster. I don't know if he's still with the Rockets or not. I'm not most up-to-date on my Rockets depth chart. But like, they had some NBA
Nate Hinton, shout out to Gastonia. He was on it. He was on a couple NBA rosters.
They had some NBA guys, but they all kind of played the same. And Houston's system with Kelvin Sampson is very guard heavy, so like it worked. But now you have somebody in Walker who does things a little bit differently, fits the Houston mold perfectly, still, but somebody who has a little bit more variance and versatility. I think could just take them to another level. We talked on the ACC podcast about how I think UNC is going to be historically good this year, win the national championship and all that. I have more confidence in Houston making the Final Four than I do UNC, because I think that's how high. I agree with you. I think that's how high Houston's floor is with the way they play, and just what we know we're going to get from them, even on an off shooting night, their rebounding and defense is going to give them a shot to win every single game they play in.
And that's why I have them winning the national championship, because I think they are the best bet to make the Final Four, and the Final Four is in Houston.
Yes.
And, usually you don't look at
so
where the
hard
Final Four is, but the Final Four is in Houston. And it would just be perfect for Kelvin Sampson to win his first national championship at home, essentially.
I would prefer for UNC to be in the Final Four and to not have to A, play Houston, B, play Houston in Houston. So I'm not rooting for that. Y'all have fun cheering for that.
But Marcus Sasser is my preseason player of the year. Now, part of that is he is the only guard that's really an option for preseason player of the year. There's some wings. There's a lot of bigs. But if Houston finishes the season number 1, which I think they will end up doing, just based on how rankings work, and Marcus Sasser proves to be the best guard in the country. He's the best guard in the country on the number 1 team with no positional competition for that role. He's an easy pick for me for first team All-American, and a relatively easy pick for National Player of the Year. The only 3 that really you have to look at are Drew Timme, Oscar Tshiebwe, and Armando Bacot. But again, all of them have drawbacks. Timme can't play defense. Tshiebwe's hurt right now. Armando Bacot might have to give up some of his offense for Caleb Love and RJ Davis and Pete Nance. So I think Marcus Sasser's best position to be Player of the Year. And could you just imagine it if Houston wins the national championship with the Player of the Year in Houston for Kelvin Sampson's first? That's instant legend
It
status.
doesn't get any.
That's crazy.
Doesn't get any more storybook than that, right? And I think one of the reasons why, because I feel the same way you do, Connor. I think one of the reasons why I think Houston is going to hit number 1 at least some point this year and stay there is largely because there's not going to be a ton of competition for them in the American, right? Riley, I think Memphis is their toughest test, and we know the athleticism that Memphis plays with and the general talent level. You bring in a guy like Kendrick Davis with an interconference transfer coming in from SMU. Memphis should expect to be a tournament team. Again, they should expect to make it the second year or second time in a row. But I don't view them even as a threat to Houston, because that gap between Houston and everybody else, even for a team like Memphis who's solid, is so wide that I have a hard time thinking they're going to lose more than maybe a handful of games in conference play.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it wouldn't be shocking to see Memphis get at least one of them. I think that year where Memphis missed the tournament and Houston made the Elite Eight, Memphis blew them out once, if memory serves me correct. I know they at least got a win. And, yeah, I think Memphis should be that clear-cut number 2. I would say there's an outside shot Cincinnati could catch him, but Memphis just wouldn't bring him back. I think DeAndre Williams is the kind of player who gives you such a high floor with his ability on both ends of the court. I mean, he can guard every position. Such an incredible passer who, I mean, he is going to throw KO my guy, Akabundu Ihiogu. I haven't said his name in a while, so my pronunciation's good. But KO is going to catch so many lobs from DeAndre Williams just out of the high post, where he's going to find him cutting, or just honestly throw it way up, throw it to the top of the backboard, and KO can catch it. So I think what he does on both ends of the floor can give Memphis a high floor. I think you're going to see them play that helter-skelter pressure defense that Penny's had such high success under, and I think with Kendrick Davis, you finally get a point guard that theoretically should bring some stability. And I believe that Emmanuel Acott was a big loss, just giving Memphis another bite of the apple to have someone who can control the tempo, who can make sure the ball is not just getting thrown into the stands, who can sort of keep others' shots in check and not having guys taking heat check threes when they've been cold. But I still think Kendrick Davis is so talented that they shouldn't have any issue getting back into the big dance.
Great use of heat check. Connor, is there somebody else? Is there a third team that is really worth monitoring in the American, or is it a matter of Houston, tier, Memphis, tier, everybody else?
Well, first off, I think it is Houston tier, Memphis, maybe a soft tier. But I am not going to keep my eyes off of Cincinnati until at least conference play is in full swing. First off, it's Wes Miller's second year, right? He had 1 year to get them looking solid. They looked okay towards the end of last year. Obviously, didn't make the tournament, but they have talent. They bring in Rob Finney from Indiana. They return David DeJulius. They return Jeremiah Davenport. They bring in Landers Nolly from Memphis.
World traveler.
So I and John Newman. So they return, 2 fifth-year guys and Davenport, and bring in a fifth-year guy and a redshirt senior. So they have talent, but they also have experience at that level with a coach like Wes Miller, where, I would not be surprised if Cincinnati, I don't think they win the Maui because San Diego's going to win the Maui. But I would not be surprised if Cincinnati pulls San Diego State. Well, I'm saving my voice with every word I can get out. But I think that I would not be surprised if they pull off an upset against one of those big teams that they catch in the Maui, either if it's the first round game or maybe they lose that, but they catch that second, because that second round matchup's going to be difficult for them no matter who they face. So I think that Cincinnati is a team to watch and monitor as the season goes on, because I think they could sneak into the tournament pretty easily.
People forget that Landers Nolly has a history in Maui. He was on that Virginia Tech team, beat Michigan State back in 2019, 2020. I want to say he had a big game that time. And that was like Mike Young's introduction. Like Virginia Tech kind of stunk that year, but it was at least like, oh, this Mike Young dude can coach. So who knows? Maybe round 2 from Landers.
Yeah, I think Cincinnati is going to end up being a bubble team. I think which side of the bubble they fall on is going to depend on how they do in Maui, and then if they're able to pick off Houston or even Memphis and get that real resume-boosting win. Outside of that, though, Temple has some individual players who have some upside. Tulane has some upside, especially with Ron Hunter, which Connor is repping the hat. But there's not a ton of firepower, right? The last couple of years, there's been maybe SMU makes that jump under Davis. Maybe UCF comes in there with a veteran team. To me, there's not that depth of, I don't want to say contenders, but depth of potential tournament caliber teams in the league that there have been. I think they're taking a step back at a time when Houston is one of the best teams in the country, which certainly doesn't help. But again, Houston's running away with it. Memphis, and I think Cincinnati could be, as Connor said, an interesting team to watch. Move to the A10. Dayton is not on the level of Gonzaga and Houston, but Riley, Dayton is a team that is in a lot of top 25s. Bring a lot of people back, pretty much everybody back, from a team last year that was the last team out of the NCAA tournament. Have high expectations this year. A lot of people are hoping that they might get to deliver on some of what they would have hoped to have done had the 2020 NCAA tournament been played. I don't think they're going to be quite that good, but I certainly think there's reasons for our expectations for the Flyers.
Yeah, I think I would have had them as a lock for the top 25 if it wasn't for Malachi Smith's injury. And just it seems like there's still a little uncertainty there with what the timetable is and everything. But, I mean, Deron Holmes is such a high-ceiling type player, former top 50 kid who even his high school tape popped with like his second bounce, his motor, how good he was on the glass, to where he should be an absolute star this year. Of course, I don't think he kind of has the point forward perimeter game of an Obi Toppin that like really launches him into like national relevancy, where everybody knows the name Obi and everybody is, I mean, even casuals are tuning into Dayton to see Obi. Like, Deron Holmes is not quite on that level, but it would be well within the realms of realistic expectations for him to average something like 15 points, 10, 11 boards this year. So, and having that as your anchor and as your foundation to lean on, especially while Malachi Smith gets healthy. Not a terrible place to be.
Connor, what is the ceiling for Dayton?
I mean, I was gonna say, like, are we sure they're like? Obviously, we're not projecting them on the level of Gonzaga or Houston, but like, we're projecting a lot of other teams that have similar roster makeups in terms of they were 40 to 50 last year in the Ken Palm, and we're projecting them in the top 10. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, Dayton, who brings again everyone back that were freshmen or sophomores last year, and we're projecting them in the top 25. But like over the last 2 months of the season, they looked really good. The only reason they missed the tournament was their really bad start to the year. Like, this is a team that I think can easily, if Malachi Smith comes back fully healthy, mm-hmm. And ready to play, could easily fill in as like that. Maybe not on the level of Gonzaga and Houston, but certainly on the level of where we think San Diego State's going to be. Mm-hmm. Like, you're just because again. We're projecting a lot of these freshman to sophomore leaps mm-hmm. or these sophomore to junior leaps for a lot of these other schools and high major conferences, but not as big for Dayton, like, or at least not at the same level. And so, I think as long as everything fits together, Malachi Smith comes back, Tamani Kamara can play at the level mm-hmm. he did last year. Deron Holmes can be that kind of award-sweeping player that we think he will be in the A-10. Like, I like this Dayton team. Mm-hmm. It's not the Obi Toppin Dayton team, but it certainly is as close as you can get in the A-10.
Have either of y'all seen this kid, Mike Sharabjamps? He's the freshman. He's from the country, Georgia, I'm pretty sure. And there's no way that Mike is his actual first name. I'm guessing that's his anglicized name. But he had some highlight on Twitter that I saw just like showing off his crazy athleticism to where, I don't know, it's never a bad thing when you can add a versatile wing in that sense who gives a little bit of that extra athleticism too, to where like Dayton's one of those teams that, like Connor said, brings everybody back, and where you had Creighton that brings in the Baylor Shiremen to kind of separate them, and I guess TCU's not very much. They don't really have any of those notable additions. They're sort of one of those top 40 teams we're all projecting to make a big step like Dayton, but I don't know. It might sound crazy that this random Georgian freshman could be an X factor, but. Hey. Who knows? Like, it can't hurt.
Well, it's the collective step forward, right? Particularly when you have so many guys who are that young. Another season playing together. Another, really for a lot of them, their first full off season in a college weight program and strength program and development program. Projecting all those guys to take step forwards, even if all of them don't, if the important ones do, they'll make that jump, right? And I think that's where the TCU thing comes into. TCU obviously has the Mike Miles. I think Malachi Smith and Deron Holmes are those two guys for Dayton. But that's where that comes from. I think Dayton is pretty solidly the preseason top team. But by the end of the season, it would not surprise me if we're talking about VCU, St. Louis, or even Loyola Chicago, who's moved to the A-10 this year, being in the mix for a conference title. I think it's been something like 6 or 7 years where the preseason A-10 favorite hasn't even made the NCAA tournament or something like that, barring an A-10 tournament run where they were like an 8 seed or something like that. It's not been a good track record for preseason A-10 favorites. But VCU, St. Louis, Loyola, Chicago being right there, Riley, I think all three of those teams have NCAA tournament caliber squads, and I know you just did a feature on SomeoneHeChecksUV.com on Ace Baldwin, who is one of the best mid-major players in the country, leading that charge for VCU.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, VCU is the team that, as I was preparing for this Ace Baldwin piece, it hit me that I can't believe there hasn't even been like a fraction of the same buzz that St. Louis or Dayton is getting. And with Dayton, I think with them being the first team out, with them being super young last year, I mean, even that Kansas win, although it was in November, that carries weight in people's mind. Mm-hmm. And VCU doesn't have a marquee win like that. But as I was preparing for this feature, reading over Kai McKeon's preview of them in the ALMANAC, I mean, some of their defensive stats are really staggering, where they pressed a ton last year, like top 5 in the country, but still did a great job keeping teams out of transition, running teams off the three-point line, and just looking at what Mike Rhodes has done there. 3 of his 4 years, he's had a top 15 defense, and that's invaluable. And then factor that in where you have a point guard who's now a junior in Ace Baldwin who, I mean, is top-notch facilitator, incredible passer, and improved a ton as a three-point shooter last year. Went from 26% to 41%. I think Ace is going to be Deron Holmes' biggest challenger to Player of the Year in this conference. And, I mentioned Tyrell Roberts for San Francisco earlier as an under-the-radar WCC transfer, but I've heard no one mention Brandon Johns or Zeb Jackson transferring to VCU. Whereas, I know Johns wasn't great at Michigan, but he started some games for a Big Ten school and, didn't embarrass him. Well, some people might. There might be some Michigan. He was not, absolutely clueless, though, to where I bet the A10 is probably an appropriate level for him.
Yeah, I think that's fair. He wasn't clueless, but it was also clear that his skill level did not match up. Right? I think that's probably the way to put it.
And then Zeb Jackson, that's someone who, when I talked to Ace, he was gassing him up. He was raving about Zeb Jackson and his explosiveness, 6'5" guard. I know I've said on here before how much I love Montverde kids, and Zeb Jackson was a Montverde bench warmer. But, maybe he finds his level also at the A10, and at least per the ALMANAC projections, they'd have him coming off the bench too, which would be just a boon for the second unit if they're able to turn from Ace to Zeb running the offense when Baldwin has to take a breather.
Connor, St. Louis has Yuri Collins, who is up there with Ace Baldwin as one of the best point guards in the league. Javonte Perkins is back. He was somebody who had been a 20-point-per-game scorer for them throughout his career. I think people have kind of been waiting on St. Louis to take that next step and really break out. They haven't quite put it to fruition yet, haven't quite put it all together. Do you think this is the year that St. Louis can make that step and be a, let's say, fringe top 25 team and an at-large team to the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, I do. I think bringing Perkins back is huge. Adding Javon Pickett is massive. It means that you can keep Fred Thatch off the bench. You can keep Gibson Jimerson as kind of that three-point threat. Yuri Collins, can also be that primary point guard, right? I mean, he averaged, eight assists last year. Has plenty of, maybe not any super high-level scorers outside of Jimerson, but, Francis Okoro's there, right? He has people to distribute the ball to, and I think offensively, at the very least, the St. Louis team should be pretty improved. Whether their defense rises to match that is still a question. They are still a relatively small team, right? Yuri Collins is only 6 foot flat. Their four-man's going to be 6'5", 6'6". Okoro is pretty undersized. So we might see them struggle against some of these bigger high major teams if they play them. But, in the A10, I think this is a team that might be the biggest challenger to, at least as a floor for this team, might be the biggest challenger to Dayton. Right? VCU obviously has a very high ceiling compared to St. Louis, but I know that there are a lot of people who like St. Louis as borderline top 25 team just because I think they have fewer question marks than some of these high majors that are in the same position. So, I like the St. Louis team. I think Travis Ford puts it together this year. But I'm just so high on Dayton. As much as I want to believe in VCU or St. Louis, I think Dayton's going to be a really, really, really tough out in the A10.
And behind those three, there are so many really good coaches in the A10. And I think that's a storyline that we're going to see develop throughout the course of the season. Obviously, you have Drew Valentine at Loyola Chicago, talked about them. They have some turnover from last year, real veteran-laden team, but and it's Drew Valentine's second year as head coach. It's their first year in the A10. How's that transition go for them? Kim English, his second year at George Mason. How does that go? Can they take the steps forward that we expect a coach with English's at least pedigree take? Rhode Island brought in Archie Miller. UMass brought in Frank Martin. Davidson has to replace Bob McKillop. His son's in there now. Does Davidson experience any drop-off, or can they really keep it going? We could bring up LaSalle, bringing in Fran Dunphy if you want, because that was a really interesting decision, Riley. Is there anybody outside the top three that you think people should be keeping an eye on?
Follow at HoopsNut351 for your dose of bad basketball with Duquesne updates. Shout out to our guy Tristan Freeman. No, I think you kind of hit on all the interesting ones. With Davidson, I mean, just being a North Carolina guy, I'm always sort of interested in them and see what Foster Loyer does in his second year. But replacing Hyunjung Lee is, I mean, that's a big loss. And I can't really say, it doesn't really look like there's any sort of clear-cut replacement for him. They brought in a transfer from William & Mary, Connor Kuchera, who's a 32% shooter last year. But I think what Lee did for them really opened up the offense with just how elite of a shooter he was. But, yeah, I think even just seeing how McKillop's son, Matt, does this year will be a fascinating storyline, and how much he does different if they keep sort of those same, like the same intricate offense and everything. But
yeah, the last one I want to make sure we touch on is the Mountain West. If you have listened to any episode of Heat Check Hangout this offseason, you know how much we love San Diego State. San Diego State's winning Maui. I think they're the class of the Mountain West, and it's a very good Mountain West conference again. You know, Wyoming brings pretty much everybody back from last season's team. Certainly the core pieces of Maldonado and Graham Ike down low. Colorado State brings back Isaiah Stevens. He's dealing with an injury right now, but they don't expect him to be out too long. One of the nation's best major players as well. This is a league that a lot of people made fun of because they didn't win a game in the NCAA tournament last year as a conference, despite getting 4 teams in. But Connor, I certainly think that changes this year, and it starts with San Diego State at the top.
Yeah, I mean, San Diego State, after what we saw against Tennessee, and granted, you take everything with a grain of salt, but after we saw from what we saw from Gonzaga against Tennessee, San Diego State has a not unrealistic opportunity to be the best team on the West Coast. Like I already think they're up there and have the possibility of being better than UCLA. But if Gonzaga's defense doesn't come around, I mean, you're looking at a San Diego State team that we know is going to be really good defensively. And then you take them and you give them offensive weapons that they didn't have last year. Darian Trammell is going to be the best offensive player that Matt Bradley's ever played with. You bring in Micah Parrish, who's a 35% shooter from 3. San Diego State people will tell you that Jaden Ledee is going to be the best player in the Mountain West by a mile. I think he'll be really good. I don't know if he'll be the best. But so you have the defensive weapons that you need, especially in guys like Lamont Butler and Nathan Mensah. But you also have one of the better two-way transfers in the country in Darian Trammell. And those other pieces, and that's not even counting, Keishad Johnson and freshman Eliza Saunders, to the point where you're looking at Adam Seiko and Arop as like your 9th and 10th guys in this rotation. Like, this is a deep team that's going to play a lot of defense and have playmakers on offense where I don't think they're going to struggle to score quite as much as they did last year. So San Diego State's they are going to be the best team in the Mountain West, and there is a not 0% chance that they're the best team west of the Rockies.
I think
I want to ask a question for both of y'all.
But go ahead. Well, we'll get to me in a second.
Oh yeah. No, I was just going to ask because I know Brian. I think of you as kind of like the OG San Diego State fanboy of this offseason. You've been like beating the drum for San Diego State probably since like April 4th, the day after, or April 5th, the day after the national championship. What is it about San Diego State's defense that makes it so good? Because I've watched them. I've watched a handful of games last year, but yeah, what has impressed both of y'all about that defense so much? Because I mean, obviously it's super consistent. It's been like a top 2 unit the last 2 years, I think. But yeah, what have y'all noticed about it?
It starts with their length. I brought this up a couple times. See, couple teams in person every season. You get a general sense for how teams are. They're the biggest, longest team I've ever seen, and I have not seen every team that's ever played college basketball in person, but they're the longest team I've ever seen. It is a lot of work to get around them, and having somebody like Nathan Mensah back there protecting the rim, they play off of that. So you have him down low as one of the nation's best rim protectors, and what having a guy back there like that does is allows you to really pressure the perimeter because you have somebody who can fix your mistakes back there if somebody gets beat, right? So you have really long, strong, physical guys getting up into ball handlers on the perimeter. If somebody gets by them, there's another long guy who has enough length and general quickness and athleticism to help cut off your drive and then recover out to their man if they're kicking out to a shooter. They're almost impenetrable in the half court. If you don't get them in transition, you're going to have a really, really hard time scoring, or you're going to have somebody get a really great individual shot and make a tough shot to score. They're incredibly well coached. There's not a lot of breakdowns. They're smart. They're connected, and you would expect that with a veteran team who's now played together for a while. They have all the physical tools and the mental makeup. It's just really tough to break them down when you have the mental makeup combined with the scheme and the physical attributes. It's just they know what they're doing, and they take pride in that too.
Mm-hmm. And they're able to do things like force steals, force turnovers, block shots without taking too many risks and leaving open shooters. There's a reason why they're one of the best teams in the country at pretty much every defensive statistical category you can think of. They don't foul a ton. Yeah. They do more than others just because they're physical, but for as physical as they are, they don't foul a ton. And so you're looking at a team that, especially when they go against teams with less experienced point guards, they're going to be a handful to handle defensively. And I think one thing that does is it forces them to play a little bit more in the half court offensively because they go after every defensive rebound. They're not trying to get at you out in transition on offense. They're trying to secure the defensive possession and then start their offense. And I think that's where they've had issues in the past, and I think they'll continue to do that. But now they have the floor spacers to do that, where I don't think they had that in the past. So I really like the San Diego State team. I think, they're for me, a easy top 15 team, but they have the upside that we saw back in, 2019, 2020, where they were one of the, it was three mid-majors at the top of the rankings with them, Dayton, and Gonzaga. And I think this team might be more balanced than that team was. You don't have the Malachi Flynn star power, but this team is super balanced.
Would it be wild to suggest that Matt Bradley might be better than Malachi Flynn? I know Flynn is still in the NBA right now, but I think Matt Bradley has a spot in the league, especially his size. Malachi Flynn is pretty small, especially in comparison to Matt Bradley.
I think Matt Bradley's better all around. I think Matt Bradley's scoring tendencies tends to be a little bit more bulldozer scoring mentality than it is I'm going to be shifty and just hit shots because I can create space, which is what Malachi Flynn did. So where Malachi Flynn could be an offense, where Malachi Flynn could be an offensive player that could create shots at any point in time and score at a high level. Matt Bradley does that a little bit differently, and so yes, he can hit turnaround jumpers over a lot of, especially smaller wings, and he can run through the guards, and he can score under or around big men. He can do all those things, but you're not going to see Matt Bradley hit a step back three. To be a dagger. He's more of that attack the rim, score in the mid-range, play very methodical offense. And I feel like it makes it better for the team because he's also a great defender. But I think Malachi Flynn gave you, and maybe not even better is the right term, a more exciting ceiling because of what Malachi Flynn and how he scored on offense.
Yeah, with Matt Bradley, I wrote something on him this summer for a Field of 68 newsletter, and as I did a little dive into some of his tape, and I don't know. I mean, I don't think like his best attribute is taking step back threes or whatever, but he could do more off the bounce than you would anticipate just from seeing the profile of like this 6'4" jumbo wing who can handle. That I was impressed by the fact that he is a capable shooter off the bounce, and it looked like he took some difficult 3-point shots and made them. And it wasn't just, bullying guys, even though he clearly has, like, the capability to do that. So, I don't know. That's just kind of what had me thinking. But, I also would envision that Trammell will probably do his fair share of running the offense as well. And it won't just be Bradley's show, kind of like it was for Malachi Flynn that season.
Well, the one thing about Bradley that I think could play into him potentially being like an NBA guy is that we haven't seen him play in college with another viable offensive threat. Right? His first 2 years at Cal, he was the guy, and he was the only guy. And so he played through a lot of congested defenses. Last year at San Diego State, and they were really great defensively. Didn't have really anything around him offensively. He had to go through a lot of congested defenses and make tough shots. You mentioned the tape you broke down, and he's making crazy shots over a whole bunch of defenders because he had to. Right? Like, he's productive making tough shots. He should get the easiest shots he's ever gotten in his career this year. So that breakout certainly could be there. We just don't know because we haven't seen him play in essentially a burdenless-free offense. Right? Everything's been on him.
To me, offensively, and granted, 2 very different players, 2 very different positions, but he reminds me in terms of, like, excitement of, like, a Bonzi Colson, where, like, he doesn't really look good doing it, but he does everything so well that it doesn't even matter. Like, you wouldn't look at him and think, oh, he's going to be a guy who can put 20, 25, 30 points on you. But then he goes out and does it, and you just can't stop it.
Bonzi Colson, man, what a pull from 2018, 2019 Notre Dame missed the tournament because he was hurt all year,
and averaged 18 to 20 points a game his last 2 years.
Bonzi Colson was terrifying, dude. That I just did not expect his name to come up talking San Diego State and the Mountain West.
The last thing I'll say about San Diego State, I think San Diego State's a Final Four team. And I think we see them play at that level sooner rather than later. It's going to start in Maui, I think. And Connor, I know you picked them to win that, and I'm on board there too. Having as much veteran experience continuity as they do is going to pay incredible dividends defensively. Like, I think they could be head and shoulders above the rest of the country on the defensive end. You have those offensive pieces. We talked about Matt Bradley. If he doesn't have that burden and still produces with the easiest shots he's gotten in his college career, he could have that breakout season. Darion Trammell, as you mentioned, Connor, is, I think, going to be one of the best point guards in all of the country in the mid-major ranks. He can do a lot of things 2 ways, but the way he shoots the ball and creates for others is going to open things up in San Diego State's offense in a way that has not been since the Malachi Flynn year. Like, I think they are up there in the top 5 sooner rather than later, probably after they win Maui, and I think they hold on to that spot throughout the rest of the season. They got some more shooting. It's going to open everything up and make things easier for guys who are used to having the offensive burden, and they're unselfish. We know that because of the buy-in they all have defensively. You have all of that, the defensive upside. If your offense goes from terrible to just bad, right? You don't have to be great. I think they have a chance to be a average to pretty good offense. But if you go from this terrible offense to just bad, now we're talking about a team that can really do some things. And again, if their offense goes further, like I think they will, I think they can be that Final Four team. That's the kind of ceiling I think the San Diego State team has. Which is why it seemed like Wyoming, who finished, I think they finished higher than San Diego State did in the Mountain West last year, if I'm not mistaken. At least were ranked at one point when San Diego State was not late in the year. They bring back their guys at Hunter Maldonado and Graham Ike. They're going to be a very good team as well. Fringe top 25, Connor. But I don't know if they may not have that San Diego State type of upside, but this is still going to be a really, really good, really, really solid Cowboys team.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Like, I think Wyoming has a pretty high floor, although I would even stop short of saying that their floor is as high as San Diego State. But you have Hunter Maldonado playing that massive point guard role for them, right? Like, there might not be a bigger point guard in the country than Hunter Maldonado. As a senior, you have basically everyone returning. The 3 transfers they have coming in from the Pac-12 are like pretty low-key good role players for them. You have Ethan Anderson, he is the other type of big point guard where he's not tall, he's not 6'7", he's 6'1", but he's stocky and can be a really good piece for them, especially defensively. And then Max Agbankpolo and Jake Kyman. Agbankpolo can be a really good kind of long wing for them that can play really well defensively. Kyman, I like to be in more of that kind of come off the bench and shoot role. I know he didn't shoot well last year, but I think he's a better shooter than he showed last year, and part of that might be that he just couldn't get into a rhythm because, again, he didn't play much because he played for UCLA, and UCLA's wing spots, I mean, we're to the point where Peyton Watson didn't play much, and when an NBA caliber guard or wing is not playing much, like you're a role player type of end of the bench guy is not going to play much either. So I like the depth that Wyoming brings. I like what they have. My biggest question for them is shooting. Right outside of Wenzel, outside of maybe Kyman, there's just not a ton of high caliber shooting on this Wyoming team, and I think that's going to be what ultimately limits their ceiling, especially when against San Diego State. Like, if you can't make shots already, and San Diego State's making it tougher on you, like it could be a rough go.
Riley, those two pretty solidly NCAA tournament teams, no real doubt about that. I think there's a group behind them of teams that could make the NCAA tournament, are talented, but are kind of operating in that weird middle ground. You could throw Colorado State in that mix. Boise State, who won the league last year, but has to replace some guys. Emmanuel Acott, who was previously mentioned, being one of them. Throw New Mexico in that mix. They might have one of the more underrated backcourts in the entire country. You could throw UNLV in there, too, if you want. Some of the things that Kevin Kruger is doing there. Is there any of those four, or I guess which one of those four do you like the most to deliver more on their ceiling this year?
Well, I mean, we've always been a Colorado State site as well.
Damn right we
have never shied away from our fandom.
Go
there.
Rammies.
I think as long as Isaiah Stevens can get back by like January, February, gosh, I know that initially those prognostications were bleak, but then he still was voted to make an All Mountain West team, which maybe he'll return sooner than we expected. But I mean, John Tonje is someone whose game I've loved to watch. I know he's not necessarily a big time scorer, but he upped his 3-point percentage last year, upped his field goal percentage all around, and he just one of those dudes who does the right things on the court, knows where to be, can guard multiple positions, good athlete, and also I think this kid Patrick Cartier should be pretty fascinating. I've been grinding some Hillsdale College tape all off season. No, I'm just kidding. I have not done that. But his numbers at Hillsdale, which is now a D1 school, are pretty insane. 22 points, 6 boards, 2.4 assists, shot 66% from the field and 43.8% from 3. Coming in there as the 4 next to James Moores. And, I know that's kind of the role that was manned by David Roddy last year. And it seems like there's probably not a shot he's going to be, this 6'5" point forward who gets drafted in was Roddy a first-round pick? I think he was, wasn't he?
Yep.
Yeah, he was.
Yep.
To where I don't think Cartier doesn't have, that type of ceiling, but maybe he has enough in his bag to where, he can hold it down until Stevens gets healthy as far as, like, being able to get some production from the perimeter. I guess he's more of he probably plays around the basket some too, but just needing scoring in general.
Colorado State is one of those teams where everybody on the court is a 3-point threat at all times. And that makes them really tough to guard. I think offensively they'll be good again. The defense is the question because you don't have that much size. And they didn't last year, but Roddy and what he could do, defending fives, out point guards, allowed you to get away with some of that, right? And You're not going to have a first-round pick in that mold, that Draymond Green type mold, on your roster every year, particularly at a school like Colorado State. So I think there's potential to meet that ceiling could come down to how they perform defensively. Connor, who else in the Mountain West should we be keeping our eye on? Is it one of those 4 teams or somebody else in the league?
I like the floor of Boise State. Part of that is because, we've seen that Leon Rice has a high floor just as a coach. I like Marcus Shaver. I like Tyson Degenhart. The ceiling's not very high, and I don't think that we will see them play at a level where we can see them contending for a Mountain West title. I think the one team that really does have that ceiling where, like, if you're looking at this team could be sneaky and maybe not win the Mountain West title, but maybe win the Mountain West tournament, for example. That's year 2 Richard Pitino at New Mexico State. Jalen House, I think is a really good player at the point guard position. They've got Jamal Mashburn and Javante Johnson and Josiah Alec who can fire it from 3. Morris Udeze is an adequate interior defender and a pretty good low post scorer. So like that group, all juniors, seniors, and 5th-year guys, is pretty good. They have Donovan Dent as a pretty hyped-up freshman. If they play at their ceiling, like, I think that's a team that could maybe not finish first, because I think San Diego State's that much farther ahead, but maybe finish 3rd over Colorado State. But more so, I think that's the team that you don't want to face. Like, you don't want to get them as the 4 seed in the Mountain West tournament, because like if you're San Diego State and you're looking at that team, I mean, Colorado State can also shoot it, so that would be tough too, but like either of those teams, if you face them as the 1 seed, like you're not gonna want to do that. You're gonna want to hope that they get knocked out before they reach that point, because I think New Mexico is the one that can kind of get knocked off.
Yeah, talking to some coaches in the Mountain West last season, Mashburn and House were the ones they were among the most scared of, potentially going
that
off.
That backcourt is electric at its ceiling.
Yeah, those are the one. They were the guys who were like, they're really good, and New Mexico isn't good enough yet for us to really lose to them, but we can lose to them. That's how like those two can win a game. Bring both those guys back, add some size inside. I like New Mexico as a sneaky team in there that could cause some havoc. We're going to open it up now to the rest of the country. Everybody else's traditional one-bid leagues. If you listen to our podcast earlier in the season where we previewed the ALMANAC, I talked about how the Sun Belt, Fun Belt could be a 2-bid league this year. I just think that league's really strong at the top. I think Georgia State, team I picked to win, could be really, really good, and obviously has had some NCAA tournament success. James Madison in that mix, Louisiana, South Alabama, Texas State, who's won back-to-back Sun Belt titles. All those teams are going to be really, really good. That race is going to be a lot of fun to watch. But Riley, what league do you want to make sure we highlight as we go around the country here?
Of course, I got to mention my Big South boys, one of the leagues I covered for the Almanac, just because Longwood is bringing back 4 of their 5 starters, replacing the point guard with Waylon Napper, who's a transfer from Southern Miss, who really good out of pick and rolls. I think Lucas is doing a feature or had a little blurb on him coming to the Heat Check site, but. They should win the league again, and if they don't, Winthrop will be right there. UNC Asheville will be right there, to where the top of the Big South is pretty stacked. So I'm excited to see how that unfolds, especially after covering that league this summer.
Yeah, Connor.
I mean, I think there's 2. I think the race in the Big West, and I've been harping on this, I think the race in the Big West is going to be really fun. You've got UC Santa Barbara, who brings in Andre Kelly. To kind of replace the hole they have at the 5, has one of the most electric teams, I think, at the mid-major level at its ceiling, and could put themselves in a position where they're a very popular, like 12 or 13 seed come the tournament. I think the one that I'm starting to gain a little bit more traction or a little bit more love for, and maybe not as a league, but just as a Cinderella, is Furman in the SoCon. Yes. I think Furman's going to be really good. Pretty much, their top 5 or 6 or 7 guys can all shoot the ball, can all play offense, and I like Furman. Maybe not to win a first round game, but at least to give a team a scare in that first round.
Yeah, and Furman's been building for this for a couple years now. Bob Ritchie's one of the best mid-major coaches in the country. He was one who was included on the jump sheet in the ALMANAC. But also in the SoCon, I would keep an eye on Jake Stevens at Chattanooga. This guy, 7 feet tall, 7'10" wingspan, I want to say it was measured at. Shot nearly 50% from 3 last year at VMI. He is somebody who NBA scouts have their eye on. It would not surprise me if he played his way this year and then through the pre-draft process into being a first-round pick. Guys with that size and shooting ability and mobility do not come around very often, to say the least. I also want to get in here and talk about the Southland Conference. They were another conference I had for the ALMANAC. League is typically at the bottom of college basketball, and it probably will be again. But there are 2 teams at the top with Nichols and Texas A&M Corpus Christi that are legitimate teams that, when it gets tournament time, are going to be 15 or 16 seeds if they win the league, and are not a 15 or 16 seed that any 1 or 2 seed is going to want to face. Corpus Christi made the NCAA tournament this past year, brings pretty much everybody back from that group. Should be better this year, could really be in contention. And Nichols has won the Southland every year, past 3 years, since Austin Claunch took over as head coach. They've been building, and they've kind of done that. Their focus is on the NCAA tournament. They've brought in some power conference transfers. Josh LeBlanc of LSU and formerly Georgetown is there. They're going to be a really, really good defensive team. And Purdue fans might remember, or Wisconsin fans might remember, that Nichols almost beat them on the road last year. It's a different team, but a team that has that kind of potential and that kind of upside. So that's going to be an interesting league to watch as well. All right, any final takes here, Connor, before we sign off and get ready for games? We are days away from the season tipping off, and I can't wait to have actual basketball to talk about and break down on here.
Did we want to do, maybe just one more bold prediction before we sign off?
You mean San Diego State going to the Final Four wasn't enough?
That might be bold. I was going to go with, I think...
Let's break some.
Mine was San Diego State related too, just because we're a San Diego State podcast.
Let's bring it.
We're in on San Diego State winning the Maui, right?
100%.
We're in on that.
100%. Yes.
And the other games they have in the non-conference are St. Mary's,
Dub,
and Stanford,
Dub,
and BYU,
Dub.
San Diego State's going to be the 1 seed in the West.
Ooh. Are they the 1 and Gonzaga's the 2?
Yes.
God,
yep.
UCLA fans would be so pissed if that happened to UCLA.
Because I think Gonzaga's going to lose more games in their non-conference. Yeah. And both those teams are so much further. Like, San Diego State probably has a greater percentage chance of losing in their conference to a team like Colorado State or Wyoming. But, Gonzaga has so many big schools, and we're already seeing that they're going to be a work in progress early in the year, where, San Diego State's going to win the Maui. Yep. Based on that premise, they're going to be the 1 seed in the West.
All right, so chaos theory. How quickly is it, in some order, Houston, San Diego State, and Gonzaga as the top 3? And how long does it stay that way? Top 3 teams in the country.
Houston's going to be there pretty quickly. San Diego State's going to take some time, but I think they reach there by mid to end of December.
Post Maui.
I don't think Gonzaga returns to the top 3 until probably beginning of January, end of December. Like I feel like they're gonna get knocked around a couple of times, lose 2 or 3 games early in the year, pick up some wins later, right? That they have the game against Baylor that they could win or something like that, and then they're going to slowly climb the ranks from probably like the 7th ranked team to the 3rd ranked team over the course of January and February. So give me February 15th is when they're all ranked 1, 2, 3 in some order.
I would love, and I'm now rooting for this, for San Diego State to be the 1 seed in the West, Gonzaga to be the 2, and because they're
15.
higher, UCLA has to be the 2 seed in the Midwest. And UCLA wouldn't be out on the West Coast. Because Gonzaga and San Diego State were ahead of them. That would be hilarious.
What are the tournament sites?
We should know this, but I know the Final Four is in Houston because Houston's going to be playing in a title game in Houston.
In the Final Four?
Yeah.
In Houston. Sweet 16 and Elite 8 in 2023 are Kansas City, Las Vegas, Louisville, and New York.
All right, so in a perfect world,
could you
we would get Gonzaga, San Diego State, UCLA, and let's say Texas Tech, all in Vegas.
That would be great. No, I was gonna say, could you imagine like UCLA delivers and is that 7th or 8th 2 seed, for example, and they get shipped out to Kansas City.
Yeah.
And their 1 seed is like
Kansas
or Baylor, or Houston.
Yes.
Like, where's Houston going to play? Louisville or Kansas City?
Kansas City's got to be closer than Louisville, right?
It has to be.
Yeah.
It has to be, right?
I know there's probably some history of this, but like if Kentucky is really good, do they have any issues playing at Louisville's arena? I assume they don't, but like
they just don't want to play in the rival arena.
Yeah, like no, send us
we'll be the most hated team on the floor.
Send us to MSG.
To New York.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
Interesting subplots
that would
to
be
watch.
Crazy. But yeah, I think San Diego State. I don't know if they're going to be the best team out west. You're pretty confident. I think by the end of the year we could see Gonzaga become that team. But I think San Diego State's schedule and just the fact that they're more experienced and have a more clear path right now to being really good, get the 1 seed in the West, which Gonzaga fans aren't going to like, but I think they won't care as much as UCLA fans because I think Gonzaga's going to have the higher 2 seed than UCLA.
I think so too. Now, here comes the last question before we get out of here. The 2019-2020 San Diego State team made it through the conference tournament, right? So their only games they did not play were the NCAA tournament. They went 30-2. Does this year's team lose less games?
Yes.
All right.
Before the tournament.
Yes. So that San Diego State team had their first loss February 22nd against UNLV. They started 26-0, lost then, and then lost the Mountain West title game on that Sam Merrill hero ball shot that was incredible. Those were their only 2 losses that season.
Yes.
So this San Diego State team
The San Diego State
team loses 2 or 1 game or 0 is undefeated.
Yes.
I love it. I don't even need to give a bold prediction after that. I'm rocking with that.
I think they lose 1. And it's the road game against Wyoming or Colorado State. It's a road game at altitude.
Yeah,
it's the only game they lose.
I'll give them 2 losses in conference play. But and that I think they enter 30-2 as well. Like I think they hit. This is going to be the season. Like we talked about Dayton not having the 2020 season that fans are hoping that they are. San Diego State's going to have that 2020 season again, and knock on everything around here. We'll get to see them in the NCAA tournament.
Now imagine for a second you're North Carolina. would you want San Diego State on your side of the bracket, or would you want a Baylor or a Baylor, for example, where it's a little bit more of a talent rush than like a just how are we going to handle this slugfest of a defense?
Yeah, I don't think anybody like wants to see San Diego State because that defense is a grind to play against, and it's hard, right? You take a team like Baylor, whose weakness is inside. You know, somebody like Baycott, I would take that all day over a team that's going to pressure Caleb Love and likely have him have one of his off shooting nights, who can bother Baycott down low or at least make him work really hard. Like the one thing about San Diego State is you have to, like, you can beat them, but you're going to be beat up and not feel like you won a game after you did that.
Yeah.
Right? So I would say you'd want to play somebody like Baylor, Kansas, or Kentucky before you want to play San Diego State, even if San Diego State doesn't meet what we think they're going to be, just because of their style of play.
Yeah. Yeah. Because now imagine this. Imagine San Diego State struggles in Maui.
They're not.
Right? They struggle in Maui because Maui's just – I mean, Maui's just a bunch of talented teams, right? Like, say they get clipped by – well, they won't lose to Ohio State. Say they get clipped by Arizona, and then they lose to, like, Arkansas or Creighton, right? And so they go 1-2 in Maui. And then they lose both road games against Colorado State and Wyoming, and they enter with 4 or 5 losses into the tournament, and that puts them at like a 6 seed, right? And now you're playing them in your region as a 1 seed, as opposed to like getting them in the regional. Like a 6 seed would put them. Would that be? No, that'd be before the Elite Eight for a 2 seed, right? Or would that be?
No, that'd be a Sweet 16.
The Elite Eight for a 2 seed.
Like if there was 6
Sweet
seed
16.
playing, that'd be the Sweet 16. Yeah, that's what you do not want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yikes.
So like I don't know. I don't think that's going to happen because they're going to win the Maui. But like that's the only thing that I could see happening is they lose to Arizona and Arkansas or Arizona and Creighton because those are 3 really good teams. I mean, Arizona I don't think is as high as Creighton and Arkansas, but they play a pretty tough style to counteract, especially when you're just kind of like a stalwart defense. But I don't know. I think they stop and beat Arizona pretty handily. Same with Ohio State. They get to the championship game in Maui, and now it's like an inexperienced Arkansas team or an inexperienced Creighton team.
And you're not going to get docked for losing that game.
Creighton's not as inexperienced as Arkansas.
And you're not going to get docked for losing that game either, you know?
Right.
All right, so this podcast bowl
It's kind of like a house money game for San Diego State.
Yeah. This podcast bowl prediction is that San Diego State is going to have a better season than their 2020 season.
The bold prediction is they're going to have a better season. They're going to be the 1 seed in the West, the 4th overall 1 seed. They're going to clip North Carolina in the Final Four, and they're going to lose to Houston in the national championship game.
They're going to lose.
And it's going to be the most ugly.
I think they're going to lose in the Final Four.
It's going to be the ugliest national champions.
My God.
Could you imagine that, though? San Diego State, Houston in the national championship game?
Was it
That
the
would
UConn
be
Butler?
appointment television for
They'd
nobody.
look at that UConn Butler game and be like, hold my beer. We got this. God.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be like, I mean, it wouldn't be bad offense, though. It'd just be like, you'd be watching these two teams, like, basically throw punches at each other without getting fouls.
Yeah.
So.
Well, college basketball fans, that's what's on deck. We are ready for games to start, I think. That's happening here in a couple of days. You can follow along all season long on HeatCheckCBB.com. And, of course, here on the Heat Check Hangout with my co-host Connor Hope and Riley Davis. Thank you guys very much for watching, listening. Whoever you consume this podcast, we appreciate it. Make sure you share with a friend, like, subscribe, do all the things you're supposed to do with podcasts. Make sure you follow along this season. We'll talk to you again next time. We'll have actual games to break down. We're pumped.
Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball, college. Come on. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh. Basketball, basketball, college.